A Circle K worker from Westminster, Colorado, sued her employers after she was fired for putting her hands on an armed thief who stole a pack of cigarettes. At approximately 7 p.m. on October the 4th of 2020, 72-year-old Mary Ann Moreno was behind the counter when a man walked into the convenience store located at 9489 Sheridan Boulevard. The man was carrying a knife in one hand and a sealed package in the other that also reportedly contained a knife. He asked Moreno if she'd give him a pack of cigarettes for free. The woman declined, telling him she'd get fired if she did. The suspect then walked towards the door but abruptly turned around, walked right past Moreno, and grabbed the pack from behind the counter. The employee grabbed his arm in an attempt to stop him but then backed off and the man ran out. Moreno immediately dialed 911 and called her manager. The police caught the thief, identified as Tyler Darren Wimmer, after a brief foot chase. He later pleaded guilty to robbery and a pair of unrelated cases and received a 3-year community corrections sentence. Moreno was ultimately fired for supposedly violating the company's policy on chasing and confronting shoplifters. The resulting lawsuit, which was filed in September of 2022, alleged that Moreno was wrongfully terminated from the store where she'd worked for the past 18 years. Number 8. Jefferson Heavener, 27-year-old Marvin Jacob Lee was jailed for shooting a man who tried to help him when his car stalled during a blizzard in Catawba, North Carolina. At around 5:30 p.m. on January the 22nd of 2016, Lee's car slid off a snow-slicked road. He was subsequently spotted by the occupants of a passing car, who pulled over to help. The group of 3 Good Samaritans reportedly believed that Lee was intoxicated, so they tried to confiscate his car keys. Upon overhearing that the group was planning to call the police, Lee got out of the car and opened fire at them. One of the men in the group, 26-year-old Jefferson Heavener, was shot multiple times. When emergency crews arrived, Heavener was pronounced dead at the scene. The victim's sister said that he would regularly use his truck to help drivers out of ditches during snowstorms. The suspect also fired at other vehicles that had stopped to help him, but fortunately no one else was hurt. When the sheriff's tactical team arrived to arrest Lee, he was passed out in his car. In a subsequent interview, Lee's lawyer Victoria Jane said that the man had been drinking and taking painkillers leading up to the incident. Jane added that it appeared as though someone else had been driving and left her client asleep in the car. She claims her client was startled, believing he was in danger, when someone reached in to take the car keys. On January the 24th of 2018, Lee pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and 2 counts of discharging a weapon into an occupied vehicle. He was handed a 14 to 19-year prison sentence and would be credited for the 2 years he'd already served. Number 7. Santino Biola. A video of 3 men stealing around $500 worth of laundry detergent went viral in mid-2023. Santino Biola, who worked as a security guard at the King's Supermarket in Denver, Colorado, was alerted to a theft in progress on June the 18th of that year. According to Inside Edition, Biola saw a man wheel a grocery cart filled with laundry detergent out of the store. The man and 2 accomplices hastily loaded the items into their black Chevrolet Trax. Biola took out his cell phone and started recording the 3 men as he confronted them over the theft. When the vehicle was about to leave, Biola removed a piece of foil that was covering the license plate. After the suspects fled, Biola contacted authorities and posted the video online, where it was viewed over 1 million times. Arapahoe County Sheriff's Detective Eric Van Cleve said that Biola's video immensely helped the ensuing investigation. Van Cleve added that the police were able to identify the registered owner of the Chevrolet, who said he loaned the car to a friend, 32-year-old Jorge Pantoya. The latter was already in custody at the Adams County Detention Facility on unrelated felony charges. In connection with the robbery, he was charged with theft. Pantoya admitted that he'd picked up the other 2 men at a train station and offered them some money in exchange for their help in stealing from the store. The police were still searching for the other suspects as of recent updates. A day after the incident, Biola was suspended from his job for violating store policy against intervening in illegal activity. He was ultimately fired a week later. Number 6. Regina Hamson. Early on the morning of April the 3rd of 2021, 33-year-old Canadian woman Regina Hamson became permanently disfigured after risking her life to save her friend. The ordeal unfolded at a home on Groveland Drive in the city of Nanaimo at approximately 6 a.m. Hamson came upon her roommate at the wrong end of a loaded 12-gauge shotgun. She intervened by grabbing the weapon, which subsequently went off, hitting Hamson in the face and hand. She was taken to a hospital in Vancouver where she underwent surgery on her right eye and thumb. Hamson fortunately survived but was left with a permanent loss of vision in her right eye. Number 5. Danielle Wesley. A Louisiana teen was shot twice and ran over by a car while trying to help a dying woman in Baton Rouge on November the 27th of 2016. 30-year-old April Peck had been shot and tossed out of a car by her boyfriend, Terrell Walker, aged 48. Teenager Danielle Wesley was driving home from the Mall of Louisiana when he saw Peck lying on the ground along Essen Lane. He immediately stopped and rushed to her aid. According to WAFB, Walker warned Wesley he was going to die if he tried to help. The man then rammed his Chevy Malibu into Wesley, pushing him into the side of an arriving ambulance. The teen's arm was shattered and his femur was snapped. Walker then pointed his gun at Wesley and fired 2 rounds. He also shot at an emergency medical services unit, but fortunately no one else was hit. When deputies arrived, Walker was gone, but they subsequently located him on Blue Bonnet Boulevard. They ordered the suspect to put his hands up, whereupon he pulled out his handgun. A shootout ensued, during the course of which Walker was killed. Peck and Wesley were rushed to the Our Lady of the Lake Hospital, where the former succumbed to her injuries. Wesley survived after undergoing 2 surgeries in 3 days. Number 4. Albert Jackson. 51-year-old Ohio man Albert Jackson was a loss prevention officer at a Family Dollar in Cincinnati's Avondale neighborhood, but was fired after thwarting a would-be thief on June the 8th of 2015. That morning, a woman was stealing detergent and shirts from the store, located on Reading Road. She was confronted by Jackson at the back of the store and he asked her to open her purse. The thief allegedly snapped it open and quickly closed it before charging towards the man. She then punched him and knocked several shelves over during the ensuing tussle. According to the police, some store items were broken and a cash register was knocked over during the fight. The woman, later identified as Amanda Baker, was held down by Jackson until law enforcement arrived. The 31-year-old was subsequently booked at the Hamilton County Justice Center, where she was held while awaiting trial for robbery. In the wake of the incident, corporate employees from Family Dollar accused Jackson of putting other workers at risk and fired him. Jackson told the Inquirer that he was informed his service was no longer needed because the items he damaged were worth more than what the thief had in her bag. While speaking on his termination, Jackson said, "I feel like they're not with the employees." Number 3. Danielle Kane. A Toronto nursing student was shot while she and her boyfriend rushed to help a wounded gunshot victim on the evening of July the 22nd of 2018. 31-year-old Danielle Kane and her partner, nurse Jerry Pinkson, were celebrating a friend's birthday on the patio of a local restaurant when they heard at least 10 gunshots ring out. They immediately wanted to help, as 35-year-old Pinkson would later describe. They rushed out of the restaurant, hoping to put their medical training to life-saving use. Pinkson exited through a side door, and upon reaching the street, he made eye contact with the shooter, 29-year-old Faisal Hussein. The latter quickly lifted his hand and opened fire at Pinkson, who successfully ducked out of the way but then heard a scream behind him. He turned and found his girlfriend lying on the ground by the restaurant. A bullet had entered the left side of Kane's chest, passed through her stomach and ricocheted off her spine before exiting through the right side of her chest. A gunfight between Hussein and the police later ensued, after which the former died from a bullet to the head. Kane ultimately spent 11 days in a medically induced coma. She survived after undergoing 4 surgeries. According to the doctors, the bullet didn't sever Kane's spinal cord but caused massive cell death and left her paralyzed from the waist down. A year later, Kane said in an interview that the chronic pain in her lower back was more disabling than her inability to walk. Today's topic was requested by Big X317, Devious 187, and Volcanisty. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Christopher Martin. California man Christopher Martin was shot in the head while trying to prevent his friends from being robbed in Los Angeles during the early hours of April the 16th of 2022. Martin's group was leaving a nightclub on the Sunset Strip after celebrating a friend's birthday that night. At around 3 a.m., a pair of masked men reportedly tried to rob them of their jewelry. Martin yelled at the robbers in an apparent effort to save his friends. One of the suspects fired his gun, hitting Martin in the skull. The assailants left him for dead in the parking lot in front of Pink Taco as they fled in a black vehicle. Martin was brought to the hospital in critical condition. He wasn't expected to survive. But 4 months after the incident, he was able to communicate with his family by blinking his eyes. In August of 2023, the 28-year-old made a remarkable step in his recovery and returned home for the first time since the incident. As of the latest updates, police were still searching for the suspects. If you have not yet seen our previous video about when meeting strangers goes wrong, then you can choose to stay tuned after number 1 to watch that one as well still. Number 1. Keith Ireland. Florida man Keith Ireland was fired from his job as a store clerk after helping Jacksonville police catch a robbery suspect in late October of 2010. The 56-year-old was working at the Hess station near Emerson Street and Phillips Highway when 28-year-old Jamie Butterman walked in at around 4 a.m. Butterman subsequently left, then came back with a knife. He was only a few feet from Ireland when he slammed the door to his booth. Ireland fled outside as the suspect made his way towards the unattended counter. When Ireland looked back into the store, he saw that Butterman had ripped out the cash register. According to Ireland, the sight made him mad enough to go back into the store. The clerk then took a 70-ounce bottle of Coke and threw it at Butterman, who was fleeing into a getaway truck with the register in tow. Ireland called 911 and relayed part of the truck's license plate number. The police quickly found the truck and gave chase. During the pursuit, the register, which contained $274.82, was thrown out of the window by the suspect and would later be recovered by police. The chase spanned across the St. Johns River and ended when the truck crashed into a fence near Memorial Park. Butterman was taken into custody and held without bail on charges of armed robbery, felony fleeing, and criminal mischief. His getaway driver was also caught a short time later with the help of a police dog, but other details of his arrest weren't released. Butterman would later plead guilty to the robbery and was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. On the day of the incident, Ireland was suspended from his job at the Hess station pending further investigation. 4 days later, he was terminated because he'd failed to follow several company safety rules. According to a Hess spokeswoman, Ireland was reportedly unable to find another job in the wake of his firing. A state attorney said Ireland's actions were critical to apprehending Butterman, adding that he should have been given a medal rather than having anything taken away from him. Number 7. Alex Davis. After talking on the dating app Grindr, 18-year-olds Brian Heelis and Alex Davis arranged to see each other in person in Parbold, Lancashire, England. The former suggested a discreet spot in the woods that was halfway between their homes for their first meeting on April the 29th of 2019. When they reached the top of Parbold Hill, Heelis brandished a kitchen knife. He then unleashed a savage and relentless attack on Davis, stabbing him roughly 128 times. He was still alive when Heelis dragged him face down through the mud and covered him with branches and leaves. Davis died in the woods with a subsequent post-mortem listing asphyxia. and multiple stab wounds as the primary factors. Shortly after the murder, Helis was captured on CCTV riding his mountain bike away from the crime scene with his victim's rucksack on his back. In the days that followed, Helis contacted 4 other men on Grindr, with investigators later suspecting that he'd intended to kill again. Fortunately, he was taken into custody from his Chorley home on May the 3rd. Law enforcement found the victim's headphones, spear phone, and wallet with Helis's bank card inside, which he'd reportedly kept as trophies. Over the course of the trial that followed, mental health experts examined Helis and agreed that he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia at the time of the killing. Jurors, however, rejected the idea that his mental state had diminished Helis's responsibility for the murder. He'd taken a knife to the meeting spot and stole Davis's 2 cell phones, wiping their memory. A judge called him a manipulative, calculating, and devious person before sentencing him to a minimum of 24 years in prison. Number 6. Nona Belomsov. Australian animal lover Nona Belomsov started talking to a man named Jason Green on Facebook in February of 2010. He offered the 18-year-old an opportunity to work with an animal welfare group, but told her that she first had to go camping overnight with him and other workers as part of her training for the job. Belomsov and her family believed the offer to be genuine, unaware that Jason Green was a complete fabrication. A man named Christopher Danevig, aged 20, set up the profile specifically to lure Belomsov into the bush. At the time, he was on probation for kidnapping another female teenager at knife point, tying her up and taking her into the wilderness. Whatever he'd been planning to do to her was thwarted by the intervention of 2 bystanders. Belomsov headed for the overnight camping trip in southwest Sydney on May the 12th of 2010. Her family reported her missing the following morning when they didn't hear back from her. The teenager's lifeless body was subsequently found lying face down in a creek at the Smith Creek Nature Reserve. Danevig was arrested in the aftermath and admitted to creating the fake profile, but initially claimed that he'd blacked out for most of the camping trip and found her lying in the water. Upon further questioning, he confessed to drowning her. In August of 2012, he was sentenced to at least 21 years in prison, with the presiding judge concluding he'd committed a most heinous crime. Number 5. Marta Calvo. In November of 2019, Spanish woman Marta Calvo arranged for an in-person rendezvous with a man she'd met on an online dating site. 25-year-old Calvo was reported missing on November the 7th after heading out to the man's rented home near the port city of Valencia on the country's southeastern coast. She had reportedly sent the address to her mother beforehand, and a subsequent investigation linked the woman's disappearance to convicted Colombian drug dealer Jorge Ignacio Palma. A manhunt was launched, and 37-year-old Palma, who in the past had been arrested for trafficking illegal substances in Spain and Italy, eventually surrendered to the authorities roughly a month later. He admitted to dismembering Calvo and dumping her remains at various bins in the municipality of Manuel and its surrounding areas. As of the latest updates, law enforcement was still trying to locate the woman's body. Palmer denied murdering her, but instead maintained he'd woken up to find her dead after she'd overdosed on the highly pure powdered drugs that he'd supplied. He claimed that she'd died following a so-called Fiesta Blanca, which reportedly involves drugs and intercourse, after which he'd panicked, cut her up, and disposed of the pieces. Spanish authorities, however, described Palmer as a serial killer and conclusively connected him to the death of 2 escorts, although it was suspected he'd killed more elsewhere in Europe. The man, who'd subsequently be nicknamed The Butcher by the press, was charged with the murders of Colombian escort Lady Marcela Vargas and Brazilian escort Arlene Ramos. Palmer's modus operandi reportedly involved introducing drugs in the women's genitals without their consent to subdue and kill them. In 2022, he was found guilty for the death of Calvo, Vargas, and Ramos, in addition to being convicted of trying to kill 6 other women in a similar manner. He was sentenced to 160 years in prison. Number 4. Susan Perry. In October of 2018, British woman Susan Perry received a message from a stranger named Gideon on Facebook. By her own admission, the 73-year-old felt like she was lacking spontaneity and excitement in her marriage to husband Gordon. Gideon, a handsome oil rig worker from San Francisco, seemed genuinely interested in her, and they began chatting for hours every day. At one point, he called her, and Susan noted he had a French accent and a soft, gentle voice. She fell for him and believed his promises of them starting a new life together in the US. Before long, Gideon experienced a series of personal crises and asked Susan for money in solving them, assuring her that he'd pay her back upon receiving his lucrative oil rig checks. One of the first emergencies consisted of his teenage son, Paul, having been involved in a car accident and needing life-saving surgery. Perry would send him money several times for Paul's treatment. She transferred him thousands of pounds on another occasion after Gideon had convinced her that pirates had raided his oil rig and he needed to airlift his men via helicopter. Susan was relieved upon learning that because of her help, they were all safe. With Paul's operations, the oil rig incident, and other requests, Susan had sent Gideon close to £40,000, exhausting her bank account and life savings. She had resorted to taking out loans and pawning off jewelry when she had nothing more to give. After he'd told her that the money he owed was on its way, Susan received a call from Paul claiming that his father had died of a heart attack in his sleep. She felt heartbroken by the news, and it was only after the police showed up to her Blackfield home that Susan accepted she'd been scammed. Officers told her that Gideon and Paul's photos were likely fake, and that she was one of hundreds targeted with the scam. Once Susan's husband learned of the incident, he decided to remain by her side and help recover the money she'd given away. In the aftermath of her plight, the woman had a staunch warning for others, stating, "Never fall for someone you meet on social media." Number 3. Shelley. In the fall of 2017, a blind woman, only identified as Shelley, bonded with a stranger while traveling by bus from Sudbury to Toronto, Canada. The latter, subsequently named as Angela Bluecoat, told her that she'd just gotten out of rehab and that she'd recently buried her mother. Bluecoat also mentioned that she had nowhere to stay while in Toronto. 49-year-old Shelley, who was planning to spend a few days in the city for medical treatment, invited Bluecoat to stay with her for the night at the Comfort Inn in North York. When she woke up at 5 a.m. the following day, Shelley realized that the $800 she'd brought with her for food, lodging, and the ticket back were gone. She called out to Bluecoat, but received no answer. Shelley went to the front desk and learned that after robbing her, the woman had gotten into a cab and left. Toronto law enforcement released an older mugshot of Bluecoat, along with surveillance footage, and within days, she surrendered. She was charged with 1 count of theft under $5,000. Shelley later spoke to a local media outlet about the incident and, while holding back tears, said, "That wasn't nice. It was all money for my trip." Once news of her plight spread, the public quickly reacted and dozens offered to help her. A GoFundMe campaign raised several $1,000s, and a constable offered to drive the woman to and from her appointments. Number 2. Rowdy Lane Maze. On July the 30th of 2022, Texas authorities arrested 31-year-old Justin Glenn Boswell in Rockdale as a main suspect in the death of Rowdy Lane Maze. 2 days earlier, Temple police responded to reports of a stabbing and found the latter with wounds to his neck and body. Before succumbing to his injuries, 25-year-old Mays had told a witness that he'd been knifed by a hitchhiker he'd picked up from a nearby Taco Bell. Surveillance footage from the eatery showed Mays allowing the man to get into the bed of his pickup truck, and later on, after parking, inviting him in the front passenger seat. The hitchhiker stabbed Mays and then fled in his vehicle, which was ultimately found abandoned in Rockdale. Investigators later met with a man in Cameron who reported that he'd talked to Boswell at the fuel pumps of a gas station. He noted that he behaved strangely and wrote down the license plate of his vehicle, which proved a match for Mays' stolen pickup. Boswell, who had no fixed address at the time, was booked into the Bell County Jail on a bond of $1 million. In Mays' obituary, his grieving family wrote that they found comfort in knowing he lost his life helping someone. Number 1. Julie Price. Julie Price from Portsmouth, England, began talking to an American soldier online. On New Year's Eve 2018, Price, a single mother of 2, was in a vulnerable state at the time. She'd been severely impacted by the recent loss of her father, which had also led to the end of her previous relationship. Her online suitor, named Jonathan, wrote that he was stationed in Afghanistan. As their interaction progressed, he confessed his love for Price, a sentiment reciprocated by the woman then in her early 30s. Jonathan claimed that he needed iTunes and Amazon gift cards so that he could access the internet and keep talking to her. She sent him what he asked for without hesitation. Jonathan maintained that he couldn't use voice or video in their communication as he feared punishment from his commanding officer. Throughout their exchanges, he promised to buy Price a house in England and give her children the ideal life. The woman sold her car and jewelry, including her grandmother's engagement ring, to gather the money for a plane ticket so that Jonathan could fly out to the UK and finally meet her in person. She waited for him at the airport for 4 hours in June of 2019 before returning home in tears. Jonathan later told her he was sorry, adding that his commander had stopped him leaving at the last minute. He claimed to need more money to make the trip, and Price sent him several £1,000s over the months that followed. She finally confided in her mother in October of 2019, and the woman immediately realized that she'd been scammed, urging her to block Jonathan and change her banking details. Price was subsequently directed to an anti-scam group on Facebook. She saw a video of the man with whom she'd believed to have been talking. The real Jonathan Ramos, a member of the US Air Force with close to 100,000 Instagram followers, explained that scammers had been using his pictures to trick people online. Price reported that she was left utterly devastated. She never got her money back and shared her story to warn other women about the dangers of online romance scams. Thanks for watching. Would you intervene in an armed robbery if it meant losing someone you love, or walk away and let a stranger be killed? Let us know in the comments section below.